first 4 stanzas of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. Now, an exposition on yoga. The aim of yoga is the complete cessation of mental fluctuations. Then the seer stands in its own form. Otherwise, there's conformity with the flux. To come back to the flux, otherwise there's conformity with the flux. What is that flux? Well, what Patanjali is referring to is very, very, very deep. You look like what you look like partly because of the limitations that are built into my cognitive apparatus. If I take on the question, what are you, or what am I, or what is the world exactly, I find that all I can ever do is say, well, it looks this way through these filters. What if I had no filters in the way? What would it look like then? When all the filters are gone, all the flux is gone. That's one way of beginning to understand what Patanjali is talking about. What we're essentially held hostage by is what we are taking in through the senses. But the senses have great limitations, so it's not clear what it is that I'm looking at, what I am. When people experience what's called samadhi, that self-experience is not containable in concepts of time and space. It's something that is transcendent. So even things called time and space and matter and energy, they might themselves be flux. And we're going to explore that in a very, very clear way. You are bodies existing in time and space. But what is time and space? Does that have something to do with my cognitive abilities, or is it some metaphysically real thing? Am I making an error if I say time and space themselves are this fundamental, unchanging, primary thing that we're floating in? So we're going to take this question on. What exactly are we looking at? And now we go to looking at Patanjali's 8-limbed system of yoga itself. Yama and Niyama. Purifying the mind of ill will. A disciplined study of the yogic literature to orientate the individual towards seeking the transcendent principle within self-experience. Asana. Achieving comfort and stability in the body, most especially in the seated meditation pose. Pranayama. Unconstrained breathing. Calming breath in order to become aware of prana, that which is prior to breath. Utilizing the flow of prana to effortlessly maintain the sitting posture. Calming the flow of prana in order to become aware of yet further depths. Pratyahara dharana dhyana. Moving awareness away from external and internal objects of perception. Turning awareness around so as to aim it onto its own source. Beholding the source as an external object of knowledge. Samadhi. Non-dual awareness, transcending the duality of knower and known. Knowing not by beholding, but by being. A direct knowing of self which supersedes the sensory and cognitive modes. A direct seeing of one's original face, as phrased in Zen Buddhism. The word dhyana means attention. The word dhyana is transliterated into the Chinese and becomes Chan. Dhyan, Chan. It then becomes transliterated from the Chinese to the Japanese and becomes Zen. Dhyan, Jan, Zen. Attention. So there is an attempt to know oneself by making oneself into an object. There's a subject looking, I'm looking at myself, I'm regarding myself. There's a subject which is regarding and an object which is being looked at, and this one's trying to figure out what this one is, which is actually the same thing. It's the same thing. That dividing line is not primary. That dividing line is part of the flux. That can go. Then there is a knowing, not by looking at something and sizing it up, but by being it, which is oneself. So that which sees and that which is seen are one. And that experience is often commingled with an experience of, in the mind's eye, a great light, as described in the yogic literature, and we'll come to that. In fact, we'll also study that when people have near-death experiences, it's pretty similar. There's this great light. And there's a way of understanding that. And we will look at other sources of knowledge to try to understand what might be going on here. Now, light itself is a visual. I mean, it's not that light is then the answer. But these are markers along the way. So, yoga is samadhi. If you gotta boil down yoga to one phrase, this is it. Yoga is samadhi. And then you can kind of remember what samadhi is, same seeing. Here's a quote from the Yoga Vishishta. That is called yoga, whereby the cycle of birth and death ceases. This requires the utter transcendence of the wavering, unknowing mind, and is achieved in two ways, self-knowledge and or the restraint of prana. However, yoga has come to mean only the latter, yet both the methods lead to the same result. To some, self-knowledge through inquiry is difficult. To others, restraining prana is difficult. But my conviction is that the path of inquiry is easy for all, because self-knowledge is the ever-present truth. I shall now describe to you the methods of yoga. So, two methods. One is the method of yoga, the method of gnosis, the restraint of prana. In other words, the flow in meditation, breath becomes very subtle, very slight. There's a great quiet that is created. It's not a rough breath. It becomes more and more quiet and more calm and slower. And in that great quiet and calm, another subtle ebb and flow can be discerned. And that ebb and flow itself is something like a waveform, just like breath, in and out, up and down. And there's a transition phase, just like there is in the usual breath. In, stop, out, stop. The longer the breath gets, the more calm it gets, the greater the quiet, especially in the hinge point, the transition point. There's a great quiet there compared to in the in or the out parts of the breath. In that great quiet, one can discern another ebb and flow. It's being discerned, is just there. And that too has, like a waveform, it too has a hinge point. And one can, because of the practice of one-pointedness, one can situate one's consciousness, one's attention, onto a greater and greater and greater quiet. And along the way, the standstill, the stillness will become so great that this divide, subject-object, will vanish. So this is the method of yoga. The sage Vashishta tells us that there's two ways. One way is to also know self through inquiry, through study, through very incisive thought, through Vaisheshika, through Nyaya, through Sankhya, and so on. Buddha had a term, phrase translated, it's called dry arhant. Arhant is an enlightened being. And a dry arhant is an enlightened being who hasn't had the experience of samadhi, let's call it, although there's a different phraseology in Buddha's teaching. But this person still is enlightened because he or she knows. That's the path of knowledge, self-inquiry, path of jnana yoga, the yoga of discernment, of kind of looking and saying, I'm not quite buying all this. I'm going to look into it further. This quite can't be what it appears. And it's possible to get to then an authentic knowledge without the experience known as samadhi. And Swami Dayananda tells us, even a mystical experience is useless without the correct interpretation. Suppose your sense of being a separate individual falls away for a moment, or 10 minutes, or even an hour, and then suddenly that apparent duality seems to come back again. Does that mean the one true self gets displaced? Of course not. Then why should enlightenment require an experience? Enlightenment doesn't depend upon experiences. It depends upon my shedding my error and ignorance. That is what it depends upon, and nothing else.